Right now, as you are watching this, there is a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile sitting on combat duty in Belarus, less than 700 miles from the heart of Western Europe, a weapon that travels at more than 10 times the speed of sound that Russian President Vladimir Putin has described as impossible to intercept, that carries 6 independently targetable warheads, each capable of maneuvering on their own at speeds exceeding Mach 10. And the terrifying part is not just that it exists, but that most Americans have absolutely no idea it is there. And if you care about the safety of American troops stationed in Europe, if you care about NATO, if you care about the fact that for the first time in over half a century, the United States and Russia have zero legally binding limits on their nuclear arsenals, then you need to hear every single detail of what I'm about to tell you, because this is not some distant hypothetical threat from a think tank white paper. This is a weapon system that Russia tested in actual combat against Ukraine, that was publicly placed on combat duty in Belarus on December 30th of 2025, and that Russian state media has claimed can reach a NATO airbase in Poland in 11 minutes and NATO headquarters in Brussels in 17 minutes, and the United States military has still not fielded its own equivalent ground-based hypersonic weapon. So if you are new to this channel, now is the time to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we are about to go deep into a story that has massive implications for every American. So let's get into it. The weapon is called the Oreshnik, which is Russian for hazel tree. And despite the innocent sounding name, this is one of the most alarming weapon systems to emerge in the last decade. And here is why. The Oreshnik is an intermediate range ballistic missile, which means it has a range estimated between 3,000 and 5,500 kilometers, or roughly 2,000 to 3,400 miles. And it is believed to be derived from the RS-26 Rubezh, an intercontinental ballistic missile that Russia had tested multiple times but never formally deployed. And what makes the Oreshnik fundamentally different from other missile systems that Russia has used in the war against Ukraine is its warhead configuration, because the Oreshnik carries multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles known as MIRVs, a technology that was previously used exclusively on nuclear weapons. And according to available analysis, each Oreshnik missile carries 6 warheads, and each of those warheads reportedly contains its own submunitions, potentially totaling up to 36 individual munitions, raining down from a single missile at speeds that make them nearly impossible for any current air defense system to stop. Russia first fired the Oreshnik in combat on November 21st of 2024, targeting the Yuzhmash defense plant in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro, a factory that built missiles when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. And that first strike was essentially a live fire test, because Ukrainian officials and Western analysts assessed that the warheads were likely inert or carried dummy payloads, and the physical damage on the ground appeared limited, with building roofs blown off and scorched trees, rather than the kind of devastation you would expect from a fully armed intermediate range ballistic missile. But the message was unmistakable, because Putin went on Russian state television and described the strike as a successful test and a direct warning to the United States and the United Kingdom in response to their decision to provide Ukraine with long-range missiles capable of striking deep into Russian territory. And Putin claimed that the Oreshnik's warheads reached temperatures close to the surface of the sun at approximately 4,000 degrees Celsius on impact. And he said that everything in the epicenter essentially breaks down into dust. Now, whether you take Putin's claims at face value or view them with appropriate skepticism, and Western analysts have expressed healthy skepticism about some of these claims, the raw physics of what this weapon does are genuinely alarming, because even if the warheads carry no explosives at all, the sheer kinetic energy of a 1+ ton re-entry vehicle slamming into a target at Mach 10 or above generates a catastrophic amount of destructive force. And this is not theoretical, because experts at the Vivekananda International Foundation in India calculated that even an inert warhead at those speeds would create an impact equivalent to the energy released by 7 to 15 155 millimeter artillery shells per submunition. And when you multiply that across 36 submunitions from a single missile, you begin to understand why Putin has claimed that several Oreshniks used in a conventional strike could be as devastating as a nuclear attack. Then on January 8th of 2026, Russia launched a second Oreshnik strike, this time targeting the city of Lviv in western Ukraine. And this was significant for multiple reasons. First, because Lviv is in the far west of Ukraine, only about 70 kilometers from the Polish border, meaning the missile flew deep across the entire country. Second, because the Ukrainian Air Force confirmed the missile reached Lviv in under 15 minutes from launch at the Kapustin Yar testing site in Russia. And third, because this appeared to be the first time Russia used the Oreshnik with actual armed warheads rather than dummy payloads, with reports indicating the strike hit the Lviv State Aviation Repair Plant, and Russia's Ministry of Defense confirmed the strike. Now, here is where this story shifts from alarming to genuinely dangerous for every American and every European, because while everyone was focused on the Ukraine strikes, something far more strategically significant was happening quietly in Belarus, Russia's closest ally, and a country that shares borders with 3 NATO member states, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, and a 1,084-kilometer border with Ukraine, because throughout 2025, Russia was methodically preparing to deploy the Oreshnik on Belarusian soil, moving the weapon hundreds of miles closer to the heart of Europe. In August of 2025, Putin sat alongside Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and publicly confirmed that Russia had started mass production of the Oreshnik, that the first batch had been delivered to Russian troops, that deployment sites in Belarus had been selected, and that the preparatory work would be completed before the end of the year, and satellite imagery from Planet Labs, analyzed by Jeffrey Lewis of the Middlebury Institute of International Studies and Decker Eveleth of the CNA Research Organization, identified what they assessed with 90% confidence to be the likely Oreshnik deployment site at a former Soviet-era airbase called Krychev 6 in eastern Belarus, roughly 300 kilometers southwest of Moscow. On December 17th of 2025, Putin announced that the Oreshnik would enter combat duty before year's end, and the very next day, Lukashenko confirmed the missile systems had arrived in Belarus. And then on December 30th, the Russian Ministry of Defense released video footage showing mobile Oreshnik launchers driving into forested areas in Belarus, troops camouflaging the vehicles, and a senior military officer formally announcing that the systems were now on combat duty. And on the same day, the chief of the Russian Armed Forces General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, stated that Russia had equipped an entire brigade with Oreshnik missiles in 2025. And Lukashenko said that up to 10 Oreshnik missile systems would be stationed in Belarus, with Belarusian Defense Minister Viktor Krenin describing the deployment as a response to what he called aggressive Western actions. Now, I need you to understand what this deployment actually means in practical military terms, because placing nuclear-capable hypersonic missiles in Belarus fundamentally changes the strategic calculus in Europe, and it does so in ways that should deeply concern every American who has family members serving in the United States military in Europe, because from Belarus, the Oreshnik puts virtually every major European capital, every NATO military installation in Central and Eastern Europe, and every American military base in Germany within strike range, and not just within range, but within minutes. Russian state media has claimed the Oreshnik could reach a Polish air base in 11 minutes and NATO headquarters in Brussels in 17 minutes. And while those specific claims have not been independently verified, the basic physics of an intermediate range ballistic missile traveling at those speeds from a launch point in eastern Belarus to targets in Western Europe makes those timeframes plausible, and that is a response window that is almost impossible for any current missile defense system to reliably counter. And Western military analysts, including Matthew Saville, the director of military studies at the Royal United Services Institute in the United Kingdom, have acknowledged that even advanced systems like the Patriot missile defense battery would struggle to intercept multiple warheads traveling at such extreme velocities, and Saville specifically stated that even Patriot would have difficulty intercepting them. And this is happening in a context that makes it even more dangerous, because on February 5th of 2026, the New START Treaty, the last remaining nuclear arms control agreement between the United States and Russia, officially expired. And for the first time since the early 1970s, there are now 0 legally binding constraints on the strategic nuclear arsenals of the world's 2 largest nuclear powers, the United States, with an estimated 5,177 nuclear warheads, and Russia, with an estimated 5,459. And United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called it a grave moment for international peace and security, warning that the world was entering uncharted territory. And while President Trump indicated he wanted to replace New START with a new modernized treaty, and reports emerged from Axios that U.S. and Russian negotiators, including Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, discussed observing the treaty's limits informally on the sidelines of Ukraine talks in Abu Dhabi, no formal agreement has been signed, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told Parliament that Russia would continue to abide by the old limits only as long as Washington did the same. And I want you to really sit with that for a moment, because we now have nuclear-capable hypersonic missiles deployed in Belarus with no arms control treaty governing them, no on-site inspections, no data exchanges, no transparency mechanisms, and no verification of any kind. And that is a situation that arms control experts have been warning about for years, and it is now reality. Now, if you're wondering what the United States is doing about this, the answer is both something and not nearly enough. Because back in July of 2024, the United States and Germany jointly announced plans to deploy American long-range missiles in Germany starting in 2026, including Tomahawk cruise missiles, SM-6 multi-purpose missiles, and the developmental long-range hypersonic weapon known as Dark Eagle, which is designed to travel at speeds of at least Mach 5, with some estimates suggesting it could reach Mach 17 with a range of about 2,775 kilometers. And this was explicitly framed as a response to Russia's growing missile capabilities and a way to fill what NATO calls a capability gap. But here's the problem. As of January 2026, the United States Army confirmed that it had missed its deadline to field the Dark Eagle system, marking the third missed deployment deadline after previous delays in 2023 and 2024. And this is despite more than $12 billion invested by the Pentagon in the program. And while the Army says the system should be ready in early 2026, the fact remains that Russia already has its Oreshnik deployed and on combat duty in Belarus, while America's equivalent ground-based hypersonic weapon is still not operationally fielded. And that gap, that window where Russia has a deployed capability that the United States does not yet match on the ground in Europe, is exactly the kind of strategic imbalance that creates dangerous instability. And I want to be really clear about what this deployment in Belarus represents in the broader geopolitical picture, because this is not happening in isolation. This is part of a deliberate Russian strategy to use nuclear signaling and advanced weapons deployments as a form of coercive diplomacy designed to intimidate NATO and to discourage Western support for Ukraine. And the Oreshnik deployment comes alongside the fact that Russia has already stationed tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, with Lukashenko confirming that Belarus currently hosts several dozen Russian tactical nuclear warheads, and Russia revised its nuclear doctrine in late 2024 to formally place Belarus under the Russian nuclear umbrella and to lower the threshold for nuclear weapons use, stating that Russia could use nuclear weapons in the event of aggression against Russia and Belarus with conventional weapons that threaten their sovereignty or territorial integrity. And that is an extraordinarily broad and deliberately vague formulation that essentially says any conventional military action against Belarus that Russia deems threatening could trigger a nuclear response. And when you combine that revised doctrine with the physical deployment of nuclear-capable Oreshnik missiles and tactical nuclear warheads on Belarusian soil, you have a situation that military strategist Jeffrey Lewis described by noting, "There is no military reason to put the system in Belarus, only political ones," comparing it to a hypothetical scenario where the United States placed nuclear-armed Tomahawk cruise missiles in Germany, which even Washington has not done, has not. And there is one more development that makes this even more alarming, because Russian media reported in February of 2026 that Russia's defense industry is already developing a more advanced version of the Oreshnik, informally referred to as Son of Oreshnik, which is described as carrying 8 kinetic warheads instead of 6, with the ability to reach speeds of up to Mach 15 and the capability to destroy targets buried at depths of approximately 30 meters. And while these claims should be treated with appropriate caution because they originate from Russian sources with obvious propaganda motivations, the trajectory is clear. Russia is not slowing down its hypersonic weapons development, it is accelerating it, and the deployment to Belarus is just the beginning of what could become a much larger forward-basing strategy that puts American allies and American troops within minutes of catastrophic strike capabilities. So where does this leave us, and what should every American understand about what is happening right now? First, the deployment of the Oreshnik in Belarus is real. It is confirmed by satellite imagery, by Russian and Belarusian government statements, and by the assessment of respected Western researchers. Second, this weapon has been used in actual combat twice against Ukraine and represents a capability that current Western air defenses would struggle to counter. Third, the New START treaty has expired, leaving no legal framework constraining Russian or American nuclear arsenals. Fourth, the United States has not yet fielded its own equivalent ground-based hypersonic weapon in Europe, creating a temporary but dangerous capability gap. And fifth, Russia is already working on more advanced versions of this weapon system. So if you have been paying attention to this channel, you know that we do not do fear-mongering here. We do facts. And the facts on this story are alarming enough without any exaggeration. And if you found this breakdown valuable, then I need you to do 2 things right now. First, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because this story is going to keep developing, and you need a source that gives you the full picture, not the sanitized version. And second, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because the more people understand what is actually happening with these weapons deployments, the harder it becomes for politicians on any side to sweep it under the rug. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.